Hello, welcome to this session about Excel. My name is Ingeborg Hawighorst. I live in New Plymouth, New Zealand, and at the moment we're experiencing a flurry of earthquakes. So if I get a little shaky every once in a while, let's just put that down to the earthquakes and not to me being nervous or something like that, because I never get nervous. Today, I want to take you through a few changes that have recently been introduced in Excel, and some of these changes fundamentally change the way that we work with Excel, or that we can work with Excel. So I'm going to ask Lauren to share my screen now so I can take you through a few things there. First of all,
sorry, Inga, I don't actually have your screen shared yet.
Okay, hang on, I need to, do I need to do something, or are you doing everything?
No, you need to share it from the Teams client and then I'll send it live.
I will share it from the Teams client and Lauren will send it live. Are we there yet?
Yep, you're live now.
Cool. So the first thing, and this is one of the most important things that we need to look at today, is the sponsors who make this event possible. So let's just acknowledge that these people have contributed to this event in a sponsorship role, and we are very grateful for them for their contributions. And now let's get into the Excel part of it. So I'm calling this Excel Reinvented, and that is because Excel really works in a different way. We're going to look at a few new functions, and the first set of functions are typically introduced as dynamic arrays or dynamic array functions, and these 6 functions are unique, sort by filter, sequence, and rand array. We're going to look into examples for most of them. Then we're going to have a look at XLOOKUP. If you've ever used VLOOKUP, you want to know about XLOOKUP. And finally, we're going to have a look at the let function, which is in insider builds at the moment. So it's not available to maybe everybody who's looking at this presentation, but it will become available to you soon. Okay, dynamic arrays. What is dynamic arrays about? Let me just show you this screen here. So a function, a formula, typically returns a result to a single cell. So you write a formula into a cell and you hit enter, and that cell has the result of that formula. There are array functions in Excel, and they have been there for quite a long time, and array functions can return an array of results that is more than just one result in a list or in an array. An example of that is, for instance, if I wanted to use the numbers 1 through 4, I could use the function row with the parameters row 1 through row 4. And in traditional Excel, before dynamic arrays came around, you had to hold down Control and Shift and then press the Enter key. And that would give you the result in the first cell, and you could copy it down and you would get it in the next cells. Or if I just remove that and start over with, if we do row 1 to 4, if we select, because we know we want 4 cells with the numbers, if we select those 4 cells and then go row 1 through 4, then we can hold down Control Shift and hit Enter, and then these formulas will automatically be put into the 4 cells that are highlighted. Now, this whole business with Control Shift Enter, sometimes called the monkey grip, is not something that people like very much, don't remember very well, and Excel also puts these curly braces around the function when it has been array entered, so that is a visual indicator that this is an array function. So books have been written about array functions because they're not really very, very user-friendly. Now, with the advent of dynamic array functions in Excel, or the whole calculation model has been turned around so that every function is now returning an array, or can return an array. So if I just type row 1 to 4 in here and just hit enter, no special keys, just hit enter, you will see that the formula occupies 4 rows. And it's built down into the 4 cells that it needs to return those 4 results. And this is what an array function does. We no longer need to array enter, we just hit enter, and every formula in Excel can now act like an array formula, and that is a very important concept to keep in mind. There are the 6 new functions that do things that are different. So, for example, there is the function called sequence. It gives you a list of names. So sequence, let me just, where am I, sequence? It returns a list of rows, or a sequence of numbers, and you just tell it with the first argument how many rows you want. So if I just hit sequence 4, then that will give me the same sequence. Now, why do we need a function for that if we already have the rows function? The row function will break if somebody goes and deletes the first 4 rows. So if I go and delete those, and you'll see that here, there is nothing this can refer to anymore. So Excel returns the ref error, whereas the sequence function still works magically. It's great. The other thing that you need to be aware of when working with dynamic array functions is if, for instance, I change this function to return 10 rows, there is something in the way of those. So let's just say I find that the array functions are awesome, and I change this to be 1 through 10, then it cannot spill down here because there is some text, there is some content in cells in the way. So it gives me the spill error, and when I click on the spill error, it shows me a dotted line around the area that it wants to spill into, and I can then go and drag or remove the content, and then the function spills correctly. The other thing that you will notice is that only the first cell of the spilled array will have the actual function. And I just need to start zoom it, because I forgot to do that, but I can't get my Windows key back, and now I'm sharing my screen. I can't get to, we'll do it without zoom it. Where was I? So when you're not in the first cell, so the 10 cells have the same function, and when you click on them, you see that the formula bar above is gray. The formula in there is light gray. That means you're not actually in the formula that has the formula in it. It's not the originating one. But when you go back to the first one, then it should. I think my Excel has a bug today, because sometimes it doesn't show me the formula in black, which it should do. And I found that while I was preparing this. So this is black, and this is not black. This is gray. So that is the difference between, this is the originating formula. Okay, let's get into some examples, because I'm waffling about too much. So we have a list of retailers here, and you see that there are duplicates. The duplicate values down here, these are New Zealand shops. for people who don't live in New Zealand. So that's what some of the shops here are American brands, and some are Australian brands, and we inherit a lot of those cultures. So I have this list of shops with the sales numbers next to them, and I want to know I want a unique list of these shops. Now, before dynamic arrays arrived, I could use Control-Shift-Enter formulas, an array formula, to produce that list. And the formula to produce that is rather complex, really. I really don't want to go into the nitty-gritty, but the formula for that is an index formula where I use a match and a countif, and I have to juggle around with absolute references using $signs and relative references not using $signs, and it's really a lot to take you get your head around. And you also have to Control-Shift-Enter that formula, and then you get the first result. And when you copy it down, you get the next result and the next one, and so on. But since you don't know how many how many unique values you have to copy it down so far that you will end up with a number of errors in here. And that is really not the thing that is the ideal setup. So let me just the other thing that you could do is insert a pivot table. So click anywhere in here and go Insert Pivot Table, and then select the table, and it automatically finds the boundaries of the data range here. And I want to put that into an existing worksheet. So I want to put that new pivot table here, and I go OK. And now here from my pivot table field list, I can drag the retailers into the rows area, and that gives me my unique list of retailers. But I have to do some cleanup. I have to remove the grand total. I want to maybe get rid of the filter labels and all that. And it's not exactly dynamic with a pivot table, because what happens here, if I put in, the pivot table automatically sorts alphabetically. But if I add a new name here, say Briscoes, neither my Control-Shift-Enter formula nor my pivot table actually contain this new value, because they are looking at only this area, and the pivot table is also only looking at the data source is only the dotted lines here. Now that is the tip that I'm giving you now is something that really applies to a lot of areas in Excel, and that is to use tables whenever you work with data that can grow or shrink. So in order to update formulas and automatically increase ranges, you want to use a table, and that is quite easy. Click on the insert ribbon and click on table, and it then comes up with this dialog, and when one of your when you have headers and numbers, then my table has headers is ticked automatically if it finds different data types in the first row and the consecutive rows. If you only have text, you may need to click the My Table Has Headers tick box automatically. So now this is a table, and Excel will give this table a name. So let's just look at the name here, and it's called Table 2, and let's leave it at that. Table 2 can live with that concept. So if I change this formula to say, okay, I want the index not of the range A5 to A19, but I want to use the Table 2 retailers column. You see how quickly I did that? I just clicked on here, and it put in all the words for me, and I need the same range here. So that is the other thing I like about tables, is that I have to type less. So I'm using Table 2 column retailers and hit Control-Shift-Enter, and of course I still have to copy that down as far as I think I need it. And this similar thing we can do with the pivot tables. If I change the data source of the pivot table to be Table 2, then I can refresh the pivot table. So, and this is now looking at Table 2. What I need to do now, what I can do now is add another retailer. So let's say Briscoes. And you see that the Control-Shift-Enter formula automatically updates, but the pivot table doesn't, and I have to go and I have to refresh the pivot table, and it puts Briscoes at the end. It actually doesn't dynamically do the sorting. I have to go into some kind of settings and jump through all sorts of hoops to enable that. So this is what life is like before dynamic arrays arrive. Now let's have a look at what life is like with dynamic arrays. I'm just going to remove Briscoes from this table to make my point. So with dynamic arrays, we have a couple of new functions. There is the first function that I want to introduce is the unique function. So I want to do a unique list of my retailers, and it goes like this. I type the function unique, and here it comes up in the IntelliSense, and just hit tab, and the first argument it needs, or the only argument it needs, is the range that it needs to look at. So just hit enter here, and we have a unique list of retailers, and it spills down automatically. The first cell is black font in the formula bar, and the next ones are gray. That is how you see that they are not the real deal. So that is the function that we're using. That is great. And I mean, it's a lot easier than the one that we had on the previous sheet. And I can also sort. There's a new function for sorting. And the sort function goes like this. Type sort and give it the array to sort. So I want to sort the unique list. So I don't really want to highlight the list with manually, because that is, I don't know how long it will be. So if I just say sort C5 or this cell, then I only have one cell. So the syntax to say I actually want to sort the result of the formula in that cell is to use the hash sign. Hash sign after the cell reference, and it will apply to the whole range of that this formula covers. So hit enter here, and we have a beautifully sorted, alphabetical sorted list of unique retailers, which I can use for data validation, drop downs, or all sorts of, or reporting formulas, dashboards, and all sorts of things. Now this is a two-column approach. So I have a helper column that gets me the unique values, and then I have my sort column that sorts the values of the unique column. But we can do that in one go. You don't have to do that one after the other. You can do it in one go, and that goes like this. When I construct formulas, I work from the inside out. So we would start with the unique function, and then we can build the sort function around it. So just I edit this and I type sort in front of it, and then I just need to close my bracket at the end, and then I have sort unique, and I can actually delete those because they're no longer needed. This is now a sorted unique list of my retailers. And let's just do the Briscoes test. I'm going to coin that as a new phrase, the Briscoes test. So now we have, this one is sorted, and this one is also sorted alphabetically enough, but I don't need these helper cells for my unique list sorted alphabetically. Is that cool? The next example is about the sort by function. So if I want to sort a table traditionally, I want to say I want to sort this by sales largest to smallest. So this is the sort order I have, Moana at the top and Bailey at the bottom. And I want this list sorted with a formula. Now, when I use the sort function, as we've just seen, it's really easy to sort the names. So I just need to go sort and then click the names column. But this is not the sort order I want. I want the sort order of the whole column. So I can actually use the sort command let's just start that from scratch. So I can start with the sort command and tell it what you want to sort. Okay, I want to sort the whole table. And you go out. The next parameter is for the sort index. So what column do I want to sort by? So I want to sort the sales alpha table by net sales, and that is the third column. So I put in a 3. And then I can also put in the sort order, and that is -1 for descending. So do that. And that is now I have the whole table with the, including the headers, and it is now sorted by sales. That is wonderful. I have Moana at the top and Bailey at the bottom, but I only want this column. I don't really want the other 3 columns. So in order to do that, I need to use the sort by command. And that goes like this. We go sort by, and it asks for the first parameter is the array that I want to return, and I want to return the salesperson. And I want to sort that by the net sales, and the sort order should be descending, which is the -1. And there we go, Moana at the top and Bailey at the bottom. Now I have my salespeople sorted by the net sales, highest to lowest. And another function that we can then use is for instance, to get the top, let's say we want the top 5 of this list. We can use the very, very traditional index function, and traditionally, I would use it like this. I would go index, and I want the index of this range, and I want the first row. So I would go row 1. So row 1, and put that in here, and then I would drag it down 5. Okay, so now I get the first 5 of this. Actually, it doesn't seem to look right. Oops. Yeah, 2. So you see, it's not very trivial. So I can go index with dynamic array functions. I can go index, give me this index, and I want the result of this index, and I want. Remember from the first when I used sequence, when that creates a list of numbers. So I go sequence, and I want 5 numbers returned, and that gives me the first 5: Moana, Tama, Eva, and so on. And if I want to change that, want to make that more dynamic, I can actually tell the formula to use not sequence of 5 as a fixed value, but I'm going to use what we have here. It's just hiding underneath here, the 5 in here. So I'm going to use the cell J4 for that. And now I can change it to show me 3, or I can change it to show me 4. And now I can do the traditional VLOOKUP if I want to see what are the sales values for these people. So I can come in and do a VLOOKUP and say I want to look up this value, and I want to look it up in this table, and I want to return the net sales, which is the 3rd column, and I want to use an exact match. So that means I have to use the false argument. So this is, I need to copy this down in traditional Excel, but I don't need to do that anymore in dynamic array Excel. If I say I would like to do the lookup, not just for Moana, but if I use not just I5, but the result of the formula in I5 using that hash sign, and then hit enter, now I have the lookups for all these names. So this is what I mean when I say every function in Excel now can be a dynamic array function. You don't have to limit that to those new functions that were released recently. Okay, another example is about filtering, because the filter function is also a new one. We have a new data set here, and that data set is a bit longer. It spans a few more rows, and I want to use a filter that filters this function. I want to retain all my headings, so I want the same headings, and I just want to filter this function values, and that can work very quickly like this. I want to use the filter. First argument is the array. What do I want to filter? And I want to filter this table, and the table is called sales beta. I could just type that in as well. And now I want to include. What do I want to include? Now here I need to create an expression that evaluates to true or false. So for instance, if I want to filter the table by all the retailers for the retailer countdown. So I could go where the column retailer equals, and then the text countdown. And that's all I need. Bang. Now I have the table filtered by the retailer countdown. If I want to filter it by a different name, I would have to edit the formula. So I think what I might want to do is I put the word countdown, or the retailer that I want to filter by, into this cell here, and that is J3. And I'm just going to replace this with a reference to J3. So instead of this, we just look at here. Here we go. So now I can put another word in here. So for instance, farmers. Is it an A? Yes, farmers. And the list is now showing the data for farmers. Now typing in here, knowing how well I type and how many typos can quickly be put in, we want to use some data validation to make this a list that I can pick a value from. And we are getting back to our unique function, because we can now build a list of unique retailers. If we were in a person-to-person situation now, I would ask for a show of hands. Who remembers how to create a unique list of retailers? Yes, you in the middle there, and that is unique. And we want the unique retailers. So I just click this one here and hit enter. And here is my unique list of retailers. For data validation, we can go in here and on the data ribbon, click the data validation command and tell it we want a list. And now we need to specify the source for the list. And typically we would go and we select a range in the spreadsheet. But again, since we don't know if and how much this list of unique retailers will grow or not, we're not doing that. We're just selecting the first cell and say, give me, exactly, you got it, give me the result that the formula in this cell produces. So that is the list of unique retailers, and that is what I have here. We now have a list of retailers, and I can click through and change it. Here we see Mitre 10, here we see Harvey Norman. So that is how easily you can build these things now into dashboards and dynamic reports where people can interact. No more Control-Shift-Enter, no more extremely difficult looking up data. Next one is data validation. Here I have my employee roster. I employ these 20 people. You wish. And I have this roster. I have 2 shifts per day that I have to fill. Now, who is able to tell me which 2 people that I have 2 open slots here? Who can tell me exactly which 2 people are not yet used up in the existing roster? It's extremely difficult to tell. I could use some tricks with conditional formatting and highlight people here that I have already used. But in general, my drop-down list here contains everybody. And this is what we can change with the new dynamic formulas, dynamic array formulas. Because we can now just build a list that shows only the people who have not been used already. The first step to do that is to build a COUNTIF function to tell me which people have already been used in the roster. And I can start that by doing this. I'm counting the blue area here, these 20 cells, C7 to D16, and I'm counting whether or not, if they contain this value. So typically, before dynamic arrays, I would actually go count this and then copy it down like this. But with dynamic arrays, I don't need to copy anything down because it spills automatically as far as I need it if I give it the correct parameter. So if I just say not just G5, but G5 down to G24, then it will spill down the whole range that I need. So another time saver. So let's say that this is an indicator, this is a flag whether or not it has been used. And the name has been used in the roster or not. And based on that list, I can then build a filter that says, I want to filter this list of people, and I want to include only where this range here and the result of that formula here, so we're using that, equals 0, because these people have not been used yet in the roster. So, and this finds me these 2 people. Let's just remove a few others from the roster, just like this. Okay, now my data validation is still pointing to the long employees list, and I now need to point my data validation to the filtered list. To do that, I can just click on the first cell in the filtered list. That is the cell that contains the formula. So in order to return the result of the formula, I use the hash symbol, and that is all I need to do. Now my drop-down list has only those, sorry, I forgot one thing. Let's just return that. Forgot one thing, because they all have the same data validation applied, all these cells. So I don't want to copy and paste and do stuff. So what I forgot to do is when I changed my data validation to say I actually want to use this cell hash, I also need to tick that I want to apply these changes to all other cells with the same setting. So now I have only those names that are still not placed in the roster. So if I put Lincoln into this cell, then Lincoln disappears from the drop-down list, and I can now fill up my roster, and I will not have to worry about duplicate assignments of people. This was the section about the new dynamic array functions, sprinkled in with a few infos about what else you can do with how regular functions can behave like dynamic arrays. The next one I would like to show you is the XLOOKUP function, which was released earlier. So typically we would use VLOOKUP or we would use index match. VLOOKUP has has a few challenges. So let's say we have a question here, and the question is, what is the net sales for Henry? So with a VLOOKUP, we go VLOOKUP, the lookup value is Henry, the table array is the table, and in the first column of this table that I highlight must contain the lookup value, because VLOOKUP can only look up to the right. It cannot look up to the left. And then I need to count what is the number of the column that I want to return. So for the net sales, it's the third column. So I need to put in a 3. And then I can, most people just stop here. And what you're doing here is a gamble, because you're not putting in the fourth parameter, which is the true or false, which is the exact match or the approximate match. Now, this one here is sorted alphabetically, so the approximate match is actually working out all right. Without the fourth parameter, this happens to be the correct result. But what happens if somebody goes and sorts this table the wrong way around? Here, all of a sudden, you see NA, not applicable, not found. It can't find Henry. You go, what? You know, here's Henry, and of course you can find him. Here's his, yeah. And this is because for the fourth parameter to be omitted or to be set to 1, the table has to be sorted by the first column ascending, and this one isn't ascending, so the NA result is wrong. And the correct result in the sorted order is pure chance, really. So in order to make this formula work all the time, you have to put in false to mean it's an exact match. I always found this false for exact match quite counterintuitive, because most of the time, the majority of the time, I want an exact match, and putting false in there just puts me off a little bit. So we now have an alternative, and that is XLOOKUP. And XLOOKUP goes like this: XLOOKUP, and that is, what do you want to look up? I want to look up Henry. Okay, where do you want to look up Henry? In here. Notice that I don't highlight a whole table, but just a column. Okay, what do you want to return? I want to return the net sales. I don't need to count the position of the table. That is a major improvement, and I do not have to supply any more arguments. The default for XLOOKUP is an exact match, and sort order doesn't matter. And that is the result for Henry. There are a few more results or formulas that we can do. For instance, I'll just go through them quickly because I want to go through the let function as well. So there's a few. Whose sales are this? We have 895. So we can look up the number in H6. We look it up in the net sales column, and we return the value from the salesperson. And another example, it goes like, question is, who has the highest net sales? So here we look up the maximum of the net sales column, and then find that maximum in the net sales column, and then do a return the column to the left, the salesperson. This is something that VLOOKUP could not do. And who has 8 customers? So this will look up the first person that has 8 customers, which happens to be Bailey. Yeah, but with XLOOKUP, you also have the possibility to look up the last person in this list to have this many customers, because we now have a parameter at the end here that is the search mode, and the search mode -1. Let me just bring up those parameters. The search mode is 1 for first to last and -1 for last to first. So we put in -1, and that means we look from the bottom of the list to show the result. And that finds the last person in the list with an 8 is timer. So a lot of good things to have. We also have a few more parameters for just go through quickly. So for instance, here, this is the approximate match, and I want to see whose sales are closest to this number but not more. And again, this is now not sorted in for VLOOKUP. We would have to sort by this column to do that. For XLOOKUP, we don't have to sort anymore. It does this automatically. Great gain. Let's move on to the let function for the remainder of If you've ever done some programming, you will know the concept of something like assigning a variable and then reusing that variable several times. In Excel, we have not had this concept in the formula language. We do have it in VBA, but not in the formula language. So just to give you an example of let, is I would start with let, and I can then say, I define a name, let's say X, and then I assign a value to that, and let's say 15. And then I can assign another name, Y, and I can assign a value to that name, let's say 8. And then I can do more of those pairs. And the final argument, we always have an odd number of arguments. The final argument is the calculation. And here I would say I want to have X. So you see it pop up in the IntelliSense, X times Y. And that is then entered, and that gives me the result. 15 times 8 is that. So that's a very simple example. And how can we use let? One big use of let I do see in formula efficiency, because in a lot of situations you do checks, and when you do something in an if function, so for instance, I have this situation where for the total sales here, if the total of this sales column is greater than 40K, I project a 5% increase. Otherwise, if it's less than 40K, I would calculate a 3% decrease. So in order to do that, we have this function here that uses, if the sum of C6 to C20 is greater than 40,000, then do a sum of this range and multiply by 1.05. Otherwise, do a sum of that range and multiply by 0.97. Now you see that the sum is in this formula 3 times, and Excel will calculate the sum not 3 times but only twice. First, when it evaluates the condition, and then if the condition is true, it will do this calculation, and if the condition is false, it will do this calculation. So that means this calculation happens twice. And we don't have to do it that way anymore with the let function, because we can use let to assign a variable to the sum of, with the value of the sum of those cells. So let's see what that looks like. When I use let, I will often use new rows for the parameters. So you can use Alt-Enter to start a new row in your formula. Let's just move that one out of the way. And let's say I want to have total sales. And that should be the sum of this range. And now I can build my formula that says my if statement, if total sales, and you see here how it comes up in IntelliSense, if total sales is greater than 40,000, have I enough zeros there, then multiply total sales by 1.05. Otherwise, multiply total sales by 97 and close the banana, and here we go. Oops, I need to close the banana for let as well, but it has done that automatically, saying, hey, did you forget to close that bracket? So that is my function. I assign the variable, and then I do my calculation. And the total sales, this calculation of the sum of C6 to 20 is performed only once. And that is awesome. We can do so many things with that. So for instance, we can avoid nesting. We can avoid nesting formulas and get results, get formulas a lot more readable. So I'm calculating a subtotal here where I have certain parameters. The subtotal formula can look very cryptic at the best of times. So it helps if you use variables to say, okay, my range should be this, and my calc should be this, and subtotal should then be first parameter is calc, second parameter is my range, and that makes the formula a lot more readable. And another example of this readability is here, for instance. We assign a few variables. Month start should be cell I4. Month end should be the end of month of the date in I4. Then the retailer is H5, the filter range is a very long formula and all that. So we can use these variables and then in the end do a calculation to sum the filter range. The filter range filters the daily sales where the retailer equals the retailer I've defined up here. So I'm reusing the variables that I assigned up here. So that makes a formula very easy to construct and also very easy because you no longer take care of all these nested brackets and braces and all that. So a lot easier to use. And of course, it can be used for debugging. When I have something like this here, my calculation doesn't have to be my last parameter in I can, for instance, say that I want this to be a variable and assign it this function, and then I didn't use Alt-Enter, but I used Enter. So I can then Alt-Enter and use the calc as the result. And that gives me the result. But if I'm troubleshooting my formula, I can then go and say, hey, I'm not so sure, am I using what is the range of the daily sales? So I can put range in here. And when I enter that, my long formula doesn't get lost. I'm still keeping a hold of this, but I can just troubleshoot my formula and say, what is the range that it is returning? That is the range that I'm returning. And once I'm happy, once I've troubleshot my function, I can then remove that and say, okay, I want calc to be the last parameter, and then I get the result. So the let function opens up a world of new possibilities when it comes to constructing long and complex formulas. Now, that was the end of my presentation, and hang on, I just need to share one more slide, and that is on my screen somewhere, and that is the competition. If you want to enter the prize draw, please use this QR code, and while people are doing that, I'm going to ask Lorien if there have been any questions that people have put into the Q&A.
There haven't been any questions other than somebody asking for you to share your demo Excel file, and other people just complimenting the session.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So, sorry, I was a bit frazzled at the time because I forgot to start my zoom in thingy and I couldn't, with the presentation situation, I couldn't get my menu to show. So what is the competition screen showing?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So if there are no more questions, Lorien, can you tell people where they can find the file that I then need to share?
All slides will be shared on the actual session page. So at some point later, we'll be putting links to the session content and videos up on the existing session page. So you can just check back there.
Okay, so I will create I will share this file with all the examples that I showed you, but just keep in mind that when you open Excel, you may not have the let function yet, but XLOOKUP and all the dynamic array behavior is out there in the wild, in the open, except for maybe some people on the very, very slow variants of Office 365 if you're on the semi-annual channel, but I'm not quite sure. They should have it by June, the latest. So go and check it out, and thank you for listening to my session or watching my session.